Welcome to episode 3 of our podcast miniseries, Model Citizens, AI Compliance for Banks and Fintech Lenders, sponsored by our friends at FairPlay. Today's episode is about compliance. More specifically, it's about the job of leading a compliance organization within a fintech company in the age of AI. What do you do when your job is to manage risk and ensure regulatory compliance, and a tool like ChatGPT suddenly appears, seemingly out of nowhere? You know you can't stop employees at your company from leveraging LLMs, at least not for long. They're too capable, they're too useful to a fast-moving fintech company that differentiates itself using technology. But they also present risks, many of which are, even to this day, not fully understood. Kareem and I were very curious to get the answer to this question, and more broadly, to find out what it's like running a compliance organization in the era of LLMs and generative AI. That's why we brought on Chelsea Keegan and Eli Corbett. Chelsea is the Chief Compliance Officer at Flex and a longtime compliance executive in banking and fintech with a background in fair lending. Eli is VP and Deputy General Counsel at Affirm, who previously worked at the CFPB as well as a number of financial institutions and fintech companies. Our conversation with Chelsea and Eli was really incredible. We talk about how to build trust and credibility as a compliance leader in a fast-moving fintech company, where the biggest compliance risks are with large language models, and the importance as a compliance officer of developing a spider sense, which is a concept that will make a lot more sense once you listen to this episode. I can't wait for you to dive into episode 3. So without further ado, here's our conversation with Eli and Chelsea. Okay. Well, Eli, Chelsea, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Kareem and I really appreciate it.
It's great to be here.
Well, it's going to be wonderful to have both of you sharing your perspectives. As I said in the intro, we're going to really hone in on compliance in the age of AI in this episode. It's one of those areas where I think it's not quite as top of mind for a lot of folks who are building in this space. But if you're building in financial services, it absolutely needs to be high up on your list. And so given both of your experience in the space, we just want to, I think, take turns kind of asking you what you've seen, what you've experienced, what you've learned. And I want to start here. Both of you have built compliance functions inside high growth fintech companies, either in your current role or in previous roles. When in that process or that journey did you realize that AI wasn't just a business tool that was going to be used by the rest of the company, but also was sort of a set of compliance issues that needed to be dealt with? Eli, maybe I'll direct that question to you first.
Sure. I think for me, this is a tough question because it's almost like asking, when did you first know you were alive? Because fintech is just based on AI. I mean, it's foundational. Yeah. So my first foray into fintech was at a fintech lending company where we relied on machine learning and LLMs in lending. And so I've been working, and I'm sure the same is true for Chelsea. I've been working with AI for a long time. I think the difference recently is just calling it AI instead of calling it, sophisticated or more sophisticated machine learning. And generative AI is, of course, far more sophisticated than what existed, more than 15 years ago when I first started in consumer finance. But when I think about compliance and AI, it's just the foundational elements of a compliance or CMS program, wherever you are the same. And it's figuring out ways to adapt your compliance risk tolerance and your compliance framework to meet those risks, depending on what your business model is. So I guess the point is it's always been there for me.
The AI is kind of the water you swim through, so to speak.
Yes.
That makes a lot of sense. Chelsea, how about you?
Yeah, fully agree. It's always been there in some way, shape, or form. I think where the risk tolerance of it shifted when it started having impacts on customer experiences when you have bots answering questions for folks, you have marketing teams potentially writing materials and copy that is far more AI than we're used to, or generative versus LLM versus all these other things. That's the area where it was like, you're starting to trigger my fairness, my fair lending, and my UDAP spidey sense all at once. Let's dig into this a little bit more and build some additional frameworks and parameters around it that take this specifically into consideration.
I'm going to borrow that terminology in the future. Fair lending and UDAP spidey sense. I like that a lot.
It's better than it depends, which they don't like hearing from you anymore.
Right.
I always like to say, that seems a little UDAP-y, like you can use it as an adjective.
That's really funny.
Well, guys, give us a window into your daily work. Like, what is it like managing AI risks in a company where a lot of high stakes decisions are made by algorithms?
I'll jump in. I mean, we hit on it earlier, but it's really about embedding it. So you have your team. It's probably not you as much anymore digging into the details with folks, but you have a team that's embedded within the product team, within the risk team, within the marketing and CS, and making sure they fully understand and grasp what it is, and then operationalizing the framework of fairness. So we have RegFlex here. So it's our meeting the spirit of the law, not just the letter of the law. And so how do you incorporate that into the day-to-day work that the folks on your team are between the testing team, between the product team, or the product compliance team and others? It's really figuring out how to bake it in so that we can build, measure, and then refine the systems.
Yeah, I would say everything that Chelsea said. It's being at the ground floor. So if I think about when we're building a new version of a model, for instance, it's having the regulatory expertise from the legal team there, which is often my team, and then your compliance experts there, in addition to the data scientists, the engineers, and the product teams, and everyone sort of thinking about explainability from the jump when you're building a new lending model. More broadly, in terms of what it means from a day-to-day basis with AI now, I mean, what has changed, I spoke earlier about it's always been there, but the thing that has changed are the tools that are available to us that are outside of just what is involved in our model governance, for instance. So my team now, I mean, we have a specific group of lawyers that's responsible for vetting and exploring any new tools that any team across Affirm wants to use, whether it's engineers that are, identifying new coding tools. We're utilizing a ton of generative AI as it relates to monitoring and testing in our compliance programs. We have a tool within legal that helps us sort of gut check outside counsel and make sure that the advice is not too conservative, but also not too liberal and also correct. So we're constantly finding new ways to utilize AI to expand our efficiency and also just do better work across the board.
That's fascinating. It's almost like, kind of the compliance equivalent to procurement, right? In the sense that like there's all these different parts of the company that are out, playing with different tools or trying different things, but you do need some kind of function to be able to say, okay, like, what do you want to use? How does it fit? And it actually leads into my next question, which is, there's always, I think, this gap that exists. And I think you both have like lived at the intersection of this and have experienced this gap day to day. But there's this gap between, I think, what the folks who are building models kind of think or believe is compliant, and then sort of what regulators think in terms of what's compliant. And I mean, I would imagine to a degree, there's a little bit of a healthy tension between those two things and a little bit of education that kind of flows both ways. But can you give us a sense of like that gap, your experience with it, and how you sort of managed through that? Ellie, maybe I'll go to you first on this one.
Yeah, I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record because, again, I feel like this is at the heart of fintech. We're always innovating and playing in space that is oftentimes decades more advanced than the rules that govern us. And so there's a lot of reading the tea leaves, back channel discussions with regulators, trying to sort what these oftentimes very dated regulations mean in today's world in consumer finance. And the other factor, in addition to what you mentioned, Alex, is that it's also an area where the needle is constantly moving. So something that we may be building that the current, regulatory landscape is viewing as acceptable at the federal level could 3 or 4 years from now be viewed as completely unacceptable. So we're also calibrating for that pretty consistently. And I think there's also a gap between what the technologists, the data scientists view as compliant with the strict interpretations of these regulations, and then what our compliance teams think are compliant. I would say at Affirm, we're very good at integrating those two viewpoints from the very beginning. But for all of us, it's still a bit of guessing because we don't know at the end of the day what the regulator will say. And of course, now that we're living in an environment where there's less oversight at the federal level, with the CFPB, for example, we're also trying to guess what the various states would say. And luckily not all 50 are, as aggressive in this space, but there's increasing numbers of states that are getting more sophisticated in their questions around model management, especially in the fair lending space. But in addition, just general questions and examinations about how we're using AI and what data we're using, which I'll get to this probably in a later question. I think data is at the heart of the risk associated with AI.
Yeah. No, I know that regulators always ask about data when AI comes up. That's one of the first questions they have. Chelsea, what would you add to that?
Yeah, the gap has always existed, even if it wasn't fintech, if it's banking between the regulators. It's always been there. And so it's a matter of having the right people in the room to have those conversations, but also having those conversations before you get to the regulator stage. Your developers and folks are going to lean into accuracy and efficiency, where the regulators care about transparency and fairness and customer understanding. So how do you find that balance? And then you add in this sort of black box, which we're probably going to hit data again. You add in this black box that's just like, okay, I don't know. The black box always existed because FICO existed, and that was a black box that we couldn't get into. And so it's a matter of making sure that you have the robustness around your reviews. You have cross-functional governance that comes in, the model validations, all those things where you can lean into, we have a structure, we have an understanding. You may not, but we're going to bring you along on this ride with us. And here's all the ways in which we make sure that we have the guardrails in place, so that our developers can feel like they're developing something really great, but we can also feel like we have a product that is leaning on what the regulators expect. I like to say, talk to me like I went to law school, or can a borrower understand this when they're trying to talk to me about, in preparation for conversations with regulators. It's worked for me really well in these last 25 or 20 years. And so I'm hoping it continues to, because I don't understand how their brains work. They're far more intelligent than I am when it comes to development of these models.
I love the black box reference to FICO, because it's just so interesting how the narrative around AI has taken off. And before that, it was the narrative around, you're using these models, they're black boxes, we don't know what's going on. And your point, Chelsea, is so apt. FICO is a model, and we all have used it for decades in how we lend to consumers. And so it is not new. It is maybe more sophisticated. And I hope that the company that Chelsea works at and where I work, and the robustness in which we address the risk around models, we're actually doing it far better than what was done. Because no matter how smart your model is, if you are governing it and making sure that it's continuing to produce the way that you intend it to, you're still doing far better than if you had 50 people sitting at a call center making these decisions on their own.
Right.
Yeah. And it's, and we all know that FICO has its issues, and it's an accepted thing. Right. Versus the AI, they want more rigor and all these things. And, I'll plug it. We use FairPlay. It helps us get to a level of comfort around this black box, and it produces things. It produces reports for us that I can dig into in a way that makes sense to me. But it still doesn't. It still doesn't make the box any less black when you have FICO as a contributing factor for it. We've just accepted the lack of or actual bias that sits within it, depending on which side you're talking to.
Yeah, the credit score is still an input, right? It's still an input, and that's the piece that we can't necessarily unpack with the various variables that we're utilizing. I think, and I know you're probably doing this at Flex as well, Chelsea, is we are exploring ways to underwrite better without FICO. I know in previous life, Kareem and I spent a lot of time talking about cash flow and cash flow data and how useful that can be in terms of underwriting and reaching underserved populations, new to credit populations. There's many different data sets that you can utilize and get sometimes far more reliable underwriting than you would in using FICO. So we're always interested in Affirm and exploring new data sets, especially those that are reliable and we know the lineage of. And that's another thing. I mean, we sort of referenced this earlier. It's the data lineage and sort of crap in, crap out model. If you're putting trash into your model, you're going to get trash out. And so knowing exactly where that data comes from is another point of focus for the team that we have at Affirm that's vetting the new AI tools, because not only are we curious to see how you want to use it, what you're utilizing the outputs for, we are most focused on the inputs that are going into it and ensuring that we're not creating unintentional discriminatory results one way or another.
You know, you've both kind of touched on this idea of applying old laws to new tech. And in some ways, the tech isn't that new. We've used predictive models in underwriting, for example, forever, as you both pointed out. But some of these more recent, like generative AI models and large language models, that is a kind of bona fide shift. And I'm curious, of course, there's like a natural tension, I think, when new technologies come out between the technologists in our organizations who want to use them and experiment with them, and those of us who are kind of paid to worry about risks to the organization. Could you take us back to 2022 and 2023 when ChatGPT came out? What was it like to be responsible for managing AI risks at a time when this, breakthrough technology had just emerged?
I would say the biggest fear straight away is do not use company data in a non-company sponsored tool. Yep. And it's sort of figuring out, which we've done at Affirm, figuring out ways to make sure we know if someone is trying that and figuring out ways to block it. Now, I'm happy to say that we very quickly adopted pilots at Affirm and were able to try out these tools in a controlled environment. But we still have limited ability to utilize company data in the models. So that's the biggest fear always, is that we're, somebody in their basement is copying and pasting something. And that human element of data is never, you can't fully eradicate it. There are many controls you can put in place from a data security and data governance perspective to significantly mitigate the risk of it, which we do. But that's the fear that in the back of my mind, the misusing of the tools that are not sponsored. So it's a rush to make sure that we on the legal and compliance side are performing the appropriate analysis and getting the technologists the tools they want as quickly as possible so they don't try something on their own.
Yeah.
So far, I think we're winning.
It is definitely trying to catch up. The cart has already left. The train is out of the station. All of those things, and it wasn't so much a concern about the model development. It was how do we make sure we protect customer and internal data and IP. All it takes is one individual that decides, I'm just going to toss this in real quick and see if it can summarize, and social security numbers are in there and you don't realize it. And so that was my biggest fear when ChatGPT came out. Also, I very much enjoyed, I was hanging out with some of my girlfriends, and one of them said, I'm writing all my reviews using this, all my directs. And I was like, okay, this is an actual thing that people are going to start really, now I need to dig into this a little bit more. And so that was the thing that scared me, is just the ability to slot as much information into that little chat window, ask me anything. The model stuff wasn't as much of a concern because, as we said, it existed before.
Yeah, I'll just put a plug in for this. If you have a company-sponsored AI tool that can help you with help you write reviews, it's such a time saver, especially if you're someone that gets a lot of peer review requests. I highly recommend.
There you go.
I write all of mine from scratch. I just want to let everybody know that I write all of mine from scratch.
No, it is becoming this really interesting thing, right? Where it's I wrestle with this in my job, honestly, where it's where do I want to spend the time and where do I not, right? And there are questions around competitive differentiation, right? Like Chelsea, like, does your recommendation being written from scratch, like, what does that mean to the person who receives that recommendation or reads that recommendation? Is it something that you have a comparative advantage in? Is it something that is just too close to the customer or too close to kind of a red line from a compliance perspective? And I guess the thing I'm curious about, kind of double clicking on generative AI specifically, is, I mean, obviously, and I know both of your companies pretty well, so I know a lot of the like technologists and product folks. Like, there is no keeping those folks away from something this powerful and this capable, right? Like not in your wildest dreams could you possibly stop them from using these capabilities, because they're so powerful and robust and can do these amazing things for customers. But I'm curious, as it's kind of started to seep into different parts of the organization, and especially now that we have a couple of years of like having gotten to play with this stuff and experiment with it and see how it works and where it actually works in production, whereas maybe it's not quite ready. Where inside of your companies have you seen generative AI kind of get the most traction? And Ellie, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. This is going to sound like a prepared answer, but the truth is we adopted within the compliance functions, we were early adopters of AI at Affirm. Both in the like core CMS program with monitoring and testing, trending of complaints, that sort of thing, but also in the fin crimes side of the house in terms of alerts and step ups and things of that nature. So we viewed that, we kind of pitched it internally as like, let us start and try these tools out in compliance first, and that'll help us understand them better. Of course, we, have a lot of incredible technologists at Affirm that wanted to use the tools, just as you said. And so we moved very quickly to pilot a number of things. And that we're still doing that now. I'd say at any given time, we're testing out anywhere from 6 to 10 new tools and small pilots of engineers and or, if it's in compliance, a small team within compliance. But I think where I've seen it most evident, not just playing around, coming up with new things that we might consider to put into existing models or the next version of a model, but rather in the efficiency that's created in the operational functions, and compliance is one of them, figuring out ways to really streamline our oversight programs. We use, one of the things we've been using for several years now is a tool that allows us to web crawl across merchant websites. We have hundreds of thousands of merchants at Affirm.
I've heard Max talk about this before. Yeah, this is a great one. Please explain how this one works, because I love this example.
So we have pre-approved marketing copy that merchants are supposed to be using under our guidelines. And so what we're able to do with this tool is crawl across sets of merchants and ensure that they're actually using approved copy. And if they're not, it sends us an alert, and we reach out through our merchant monitoring program and alert them on the merchant that they must update to the pre-approved marketing copy. And obviously this mitigates a lot of regulatory compliance risk for us, but it also mitigates consumer confusion and allows consumers to have an accurate depiction of the products that are available to them at Affirm when they're shopping online. When you have a business model like ours, where we are presented to a consumer often on a third party's website, this particular tool really advanced our ability to perform oversight of that very, very large set of partners, if you will.
But we're utilizing a tool as well for the same thing. We have property management companies and individual units and buildings, and not knowing what they're emailing, not knowing what they're posting to their websites makes it a little more complicated. We get added to the email chains, but goes into the system, pops out those red flags. Now we know who we need to follow up with, who's on our list that needs a quick, hey, just so you know, this was not the approved materials. What are we doing here? Additionally, just internally, when we have our customer service representatives, they're sending out emails. It allows us to track what's going out there. If there's keywords that are popping into a response that we're getting from a customer, it can have it be a high pain experience or a tier 1 or tier 2 complaint that we need to dig into a little bit more, rather than having to have an agent say, this seems like it would need to fall into there. We just know there's keywords that we have to look out for that is going to pop it into an escalated queue in order for us to address, and ideally prevent it from going any higher or any more escalated, especially when we're dealing with paying people's rent during a very short period of time. You can understand that there is a lot of concern when something isn't going as smoothly as you would like versus, oh, I tried to make this payment and it didn't go through, but I can get to it tomorrow versus I might get kicked out if I don't pay my rent today. And so having the ability to sort of navigate those is really essential. And one thing I wanted to hit on a little bit is sort of balancing the need for innovation with preserving sort of and finding those necessary breaks and guardrails. You were mentioning like you have, we're racing out. Compliance is doing this. We love these things, but also, let's bring this back a little bit. You guys went too far. It's like, we're trying to work, and that's the constant balance that we're in, and I'm sure you guys are as well. Where, run, go. We're in a fintech. We're in a growth fintech, especially with us. Like we're not as far along as Affirm. We look to you guys as the where we want to achieve, but you have to let them be innovative in order for this to go out, but also say, all right, keep these training wheels on this one a little bit longer because we just don't feel as comfortable with this as we do with this other thing that just seems more proven.
Can I ask one follow-up question on that? Because I just want to double click on what you just said, Chelsea, because I think it's a really, really great point. How do you communicate to folks outside of compliance who are kind of advancing these tools or doing these pilots? Like, we don't feel comfortable with this because, like, I think one of the things that's the hardest about this cross company collaboration and work on these tools is just sometimes I can explain in very like detailed data driven ways why this thing is not quite ready or it's not working or we're not seeing the results that we want. I think a lot of times engineers benefit from the fact that they have a lot of like quantifiable data that they can bring to the table when they're talking about those things. I would imagine that on the compliance and legal side, one of the challenges is it's a little bit vibes, for lack of a better word, where it's like we understand these regulations that were written a long time ago, but have a lot of interpretation and case law around them. We talk to regulators all the time. We have a sense of like what they're comfortable with, what they're not, what they don't understand. Sometimes I imagine communicating with the team is sort of communicating like, we don't feel like this is quite ready, and here's why we don't feel that way. How does that communication when you're trying to deliver that message go, and how does that work well? Chelsea, maybe you can follow up on that, and I'd love to, Ellie, get your perspective on that too.
Yeah, I mean, it's the spidey sense, the UDAP tingle that we get. Like it is just knowing that this doesn't feel right. Why, and being able to explain. It leans back on the number of years of experience that we have. And so it's a matter of having those good relationships. That's why I mentioned it at the beginning. We're embedded. This isn't something where we get to go sit up from on high and wait for something and then say, nope, this isn't right. We're embedded with them. We're understanding the nuances. So we're able to raise those, the beige flags early before they become red flags. So we tell them, we think this is going to trigger something. Let's figure it out. Let's figure out go ahead and test it. I'll plug FairPlay again. They want to roll out a new model. It's like, we feel like this might trigger something. Let's just do a quick fairness assessment. Let's just see what comes out of the rules, and then we can say hard no or hard yes. But we set those parameters with them at the beginning that if it falls into this bucket, it's a hard no. If it's in these ones, it's a maybe, and they give them that as early as possible so that they can anticipate, well, if we tweak it like this, maybe we can do this. If we tweak it like that, maybe we can do this.
Yeah, I would double down on everything that Chelsea just said, but I would also say, like, I feel incredibly fortunate at Affirm to work for a CEO who is a technologist himself, but built the company based on fairness, honest products, transparency, and is a armchair lawyer himself. Like, he can recite, he'll say to me sometimes, or, to one of the lawyers on my team, he'll say, well, what about, subsection B4 of 1026, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't have that kind of memory. Like, I'm there. That's when ChatGPT is helpful. I'll be like, remind me what section this is, because Max was reading it last night. But having a CEO who appreciates that, even though, his training he's an engineer, he sort of pushes that down throughout all parts of the organization. We're always putting the consumer first and what's right. So because of that model, like Chelsea described at Flex, we are integrated from the very beginning of any initiative. Legal and compliance, or CLEAR as our team is called. We're part of the innovation team. Oftentimes lawyers on my team are on patents because they've helped create the solution. And that's, I think, a different model that I've seen at other fintech companies, including, ones I've either counseled as outside counsel or worked at. And because of that methodology, we have a lot of credibility with the business. They trust our instincts, but it also means you're not being overly conservative every single time, right? You're helping them to innovate and creating a path that is mitigating risk. But as we've described, it's impossible for us to build things that are risk-free in fintech because the regulations just aren't clear enough for us to ever say that something is risk-free. But what we can do is provide those guide rails to build something that will mitigate the risk that the company has misstepped. And then we constantly look back and test it and make sure that companies like Kareem's are supporting us to constantly monitor what we're doing and that what we've intended to do is still the output of what we're offering consumers.
Yeah, and there's another aspect of sort of, you hit on the tone from the top, but also the accountability and oversight. So you have this framework, we have the Reg Flex framework, you also have all the policies and procedures around things that enforce that AI or other tools are very powerful assistants, but they cannot replace human accountability and oversight. So you guys are accountable and we have the oversight. We're going to work together to build this amazing product, amazing sub-product, amazing tool, but there's still an aspect of like, we have to own this as well.
That sort of gets to the next question I wanted to ask you both, which is like, especially with these generative AI systems, and increasingly we're seeing the deployment of like AI agents, which have the ability to act, semi-autonomously. Like, does the hallucination problem keep you up at night? Does the rogue agent problem keep you up at night? Like, how are you thinking any differently about the management of these AI risks?
So you said the rogue agent, that would have kept me up before AI existed. So the rogue employee, so it doesn't necessarily change it. Yes, you have to have your internal, generative AI policy. We have one. I'm sure Affirm has one. You have these other guardrails. We do the testing. We do the monitoring. We have the conversations. But it really is about understanding the usage, what are the clearly prohibited acts that they can do, and then you can go back and do the monitoring. Sometimes it is really the detection and correction as opposed to the prevention because there's only so much we can do. But rogue agents has been a concern of mine since the beginning. Doesn't matter that AI is more prominent now.
Yeah, I agree with that. The power of one person is vast. But in terms of the hallucinations, especially on the legal side, like we see it quite a bit. I won't name specific tools, but we see it quite a bit. Made up case law. I mean, you've all read articles. I see it daily in the work that we do. So our approach to utilizing AI tools is still generative AI tools is still very much in the trust but verify realm. I use it to gut check things. I might use it to polish things. But if I am using it for substantive outputs on the truth, I am always checking those sources. And we do, as Chelsea noted, in terms of using generative AI and chatbots and things of that nature, we're performing so much oversight over the outputs of that we're catching quickly if there is some sort of deviation from the expected output. But it's not yet possible to fully eradicate the hallucinations. I am curious, though, to see where the industry goes in terms of compliance tools for AI. I don't know, maybe FairPlay's got something in the works. I'd love to test it out if you do. But I've had a couple of pitches. I haven't had anything yet that I think is worth us trying out, but it is something I'm very curious about as the industry evolves.
Yeah, our growth team is constantly asking me, is this something we could build? Is this something that is what are you doing and can we build this? It's like, yeah, probably, but let's talk more before we actually dig into that too much.
That's a classic fintech response. Is like, hey, can we build that internally? That's how you work with really great technologists and engineers. So, kind of following up on that point, I guess in the absence maybe of some of those compliance tools, because this is like it's a very young technology when we talk about LLMs and sort of this new frontier in AI. I guess the thing I'm questioning or just curious about is what process do you go through internally to evaluate different vendors and providers? And these could be like third-party AI vendors. These could be foundation model providers that you might be working with, doing pilots with, especially, and I think this is the key, kind of tying back to the the concern that I know regulators always have, especially when you don't have full transparency into the training data or the logic that goes into these things, right? Foundation models have trillions of parameters, right? It's really not feasible to evaluate them the same way that we evaluate kind of narrower machine learning models. So like, what's the general approach that you take, and any kind of things you've learned over the last couple of years? Chelsea, maybe I'll go to you first on this one.
Yeah, I mean, a robust TPRM framework is essential. So, I mean, it's understanding what the use case is for that, how they're going to use it, what information are they getting, how they're going to use the information once they get the information. Do we have the ability to pull it back? How quickly can we test? These are all things that are standard within a third-party risk framework. But then you also have to take into consideration the hallucinations and all these other things that may take place. And so it's important to make sure that you understand if there's new frameworks that are being issued. So NIST just came out with their AI risk framework. You have things, FairPlay has put out an AI framework. There's constantly stuff on LinkedIn that is telling you how to use things. And so it's important to make sure you have that the understanding and the capacity to then reassess the risk that you might have not given them at the beginning. Is it a critical vendor? Maybe you thought it was a medium risk vendor, but now it's critical because of some new factor that came in.
Yeah, definitely the third-party risk management program is essential. But on top of that, at Affirm, we've also developed an AI screening procedure where we have proposals come in across the organization. It actually sits within legal, but it's a cross-functional team that reviews the proposals. And then we bring forward to a governance committee the applications that we would like to pursue, the costs associated with it, the seats of the pilot, the surveys that will be performed throughout the life of the pilot so that we can keep track of how it's performing, who's using it, what they're finding. Is it worth the spend? Should we get it for more people? Should we expand the pilot? And I actually sit on that governance committee, and we meet routinely to discuss what the new tools are, whether or not, once the pilot is finished, what the outcomes of that pilot were, and if it's worth a long-term company investment. But along the way, there's a number in the third-party risk management program, there's a number of checks and balances that are occurring and ensuring that it's not just a fun thing for a set of engineers to play with. It's actually a really useful tool that will create efficiency at the company and is worth the expense for what it will offer us in advancing the work and the innovation.
I'm curious if you guys think that there are AI risks that the industry is currently underestimating, especially given that you're being called upon by all these AI vendors these days.
I think that I don't know that the industry is underestimating this rather than just not focusing on it. It's something that Chelsea and I have both spoken about. There's so much talk about the hallucinating. There's not enough talk about the data sources and the reliability of the data. And as discussed, like, if we're putting crap into these models, we're getting crap out. Like, it's not rocket science, but I think there's an assumption a lot of the time, if you get an AI tool, that it's going to very quickly lead you to the results you want, and it's going to do it much more efficiently than you could do it with humans. But if you're not giving it tried and true data, it's not only going to start out wrong, it might get more and more aggressively wrong. So I think there's not enough focus on the reliability and sort of what's the other word? Reliability and consistency in the data sources, and just truly understanding the lineage and where it came from, and that it is being appropriately used for the use case in which you're putting it into the tool.
Fully agree. So I'm not going to tap on that one because I'm fully aligned. I think the other area that is overlooked. Well, I guess it has the potential to be overlooked. I think we see enough studies that are coming out now, but is the complacency that can come from using AI too much. We have if you let AI drive without clear boundaries or sufficient human review, you could just end up sort of what you're saying, Ellie, is like how much of this data is actually useful when it's a AI talking to another AI that produced an AI that produced this thing without anybody actually leaning in and having the atrophy of like critical human judgment and thinking. That's the thing that makes me most nervous, is when my marketing team, somebody prompted with an AI prompt into the AI, marketing things that made an AI decision that then leads to an AI chatbot answering the questions that the individual had. It's like, when is the person actually going to how often do you need to have a person in that to break up that process, but also when does a person need to be in there? That's the thing that worries me.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me because, I mean, it touches on something you mentioned before, Chelsea, about this idea of like accountability, right? And like part of the challenge, I think, with these things is, is the model making the right decision? Is the tool working as we expected? We want to have human beings checking it. I think that's one thing, and I think that might change over time as the tools get better and some of the infrastructure wrapped around the models gets better. The accountability thing is in some ways kind of a trickier issue because even if the model is performing as we want, there is sort of a layer of like, we want human beings somewhere in the middle of this to provide a little bit of accountability and just like line of sight into how these things are working. I guess just real quickly on that, Chelsea, anything that you've sort of come across or learned on like sort of having that accountability loop built out around some of this stuff?
I think it's important from an accountability perspective. It's one, who is owning the decision to use the AI. So one, do we know what tool we're using? Then who is owning the decision to continue to use it? And then what are the expected outcomes and how closely is it to the expected? If it's wildly off track, what's going on? Why did this get wildly off track? If it's perfect, great. We're going to continue to check it. And could it be more perfect in their eye? Perfect in their eyes, not necessarily in mine. And so that's where the accountability is making sure there's clear ownership of whatever process we're doing, of whatever tool we're using, and whatever outputs that we think it's going to give us.
That makes sense. Ellie, anything to add on accountability?
I would just say, like, building the infrastructure of oversight programs that require that expectation, so that you're getting that repeated accountability on some cadence, and you don't have, some rules, or the compliance teams always follow the rules, but this team over here in revenue or in the engineering squad is not following the same set of rules. Just standardizing those across the company, so there's an expectation of accountability on a pre-selected cadence, I think helps normalize it, and also helps the company make wise investment decisions in these tools.
You both have been doing consumer finance law and compliance for many, many years. And obviously, we've been through a period of dramatic regulatory change with the change in administration. I'm curious, are there particular areas where you'd like to see more regulatory clarity? If you could wave a magic wand and get more regulatory clarity over one thing, is there anything that's top of mind for you these days?
Oh boy. Just one thing.
Your top three?
I think the first thing for me, obviously, just tell us what the rules are for BNPL. Don't call us a credit card, then not call us a credit card. Like, we just need clear rules of the road for the entire industry. Yeah. But as it relates to AI, I would say explainability. It would be just amazing if we had some interagency guidance at the federal level as to what the expectations are for explainability when using digital models. Like, everything we have predates the digital world, and then we might get something out of a regulator and then it's withdrawn with the change in administration. We need some consistent rules of the road so that we can help our technologists speak the same language that we speak. And we can do it with some certainty about the true risk we're mitigating for the company instead of guessing. And it's not good for anyone when lawyers and compliance personnel and others across an organization are guessing at the regulator's expectations. It benefits everyone, and there's transparency and clarity and consistency for consumers if we're all operating off the same sheet of music. And that has not been the case. Even when I was at the regulator, when I helped to build the CFPB and was there for a period of time, we still never accomplished that. And I think there's a long way to go. I'm hopeful that someday we'll get there, but it's not seeming to be anywhere near in sight.
Yeah, I co-sign. One set of rules, not 50 overlapping but slightly conflicting sets of rules. Something that we can lean into that is more principle-based rather than this bright line, so that we can understand and have not only leadership within companies and compliance and legal individuals, but also examiners. I think you have innovation, offices of innovation are great, but then when the examiner comes in, they may not understand or be talking. You have licensed folks that are over here doing this thing over here they think they understand versus what the examiner is coming in and doing. So just an ability to have consistency, which it's the United States. It's very unlikely that we will get that consistency, but just something that could lead us to to stamp it out. I think I look at, speaking of antiquated laws, is ADA. We have WCAG now. ADA was implemented before the internet was a thing. And so the industry, so maybe it's industry setting the standards, but they came out and said they're going to use WCAG as your standard because ADA talks about buildings. Good luck figuring out how your website is compliant. And so I think it's either us coming up with it and sort of giving and saying this is the standard, or it's them giving us something. I am open to being, if anybody's listening on a standard setting, Ellie, I'm assuming you would also be open if we can get something consistent as it relates to AI and all these other things. Because as much as I enjoy having to figure out what California wants to do versus New York versus Colorado, I would rather just have one thing to worry about.
100%. 100% agree with that.
Well, for anyone listening, we have 2 volunteers for a standard setting committee who would be willing to put in some extra hours to help with that. No, that's very consistent with everything I've heard across the industry. Our wonderfully complex, multi-layered regulatory system in the U.S. is not a feature in a lot of ways, especially on this new technology where everything is just moving so fast and everyone wants to innovate responsibly. To wrap up and kind of along those lines, I think the last question I'd love to get both of your thoughts on is just advice that you would have to a bank or a fintech compliance officer or someone working in this area who feels like they're behind on AI. Obviously, it's pretty easy to feel behind on AI given just the pace at which all of this stuff moves. I feel behind on AI literally every single day when I log online and find out what the newest model is or the newest product that's been released. But from your vantage point and based on your experience, what advice would you give? Chelsea, let's start with you.
Don't panic, I would say, is the first thing. Just take a moment, but understand what the AI is doing in your organization, not just what it is. So you can say, oh, this tool, but actually understand and get in there and be knowledgeable of how it's being used. Then map it out, see where it's touching key decisions. We're both in consumer facing products, making sure you're understanding how it's impacting the customer outcomes, how it's impacting the customer experience is really the thing that the regulators are going to be really focused on. So that is probably, and you don't have to be a coder, just make sure you're asking the right questions. You don't need to understand the intricacies and the nuance. If you want to, fantastic. But also be able to ask those smart and probing questions is where I would start.
Yeah, +1 to all of that. I think the other thing I would add, which is part and parcel to what Chelsea already said, is just talk to the technologists, meet with them regularly, have them explain to you in lay speak what it is they're doing and what it is they're exploring and where they're headed, and keep the dialogue open all the time because it's always changing. Once you think you've sort of cracked the nut on one area of AI, there's something new. So keeping that dialogue open and being approachable, especially people are afraid to talk to legal and compliance sometimes. Being that thought partner with the business or with the technologists instead of the checkbox when they're trying to get an approval is it takes you a long way in terms of building those relationships down the road and helping them come to you, or just feeling more comfortable coming to you for advice as they're developing into new areas, so that you can be a resource. That's the only thing I would add to what Chelsea said.
Well, talking to both of you for this podcast, I can't imagine why anyone is ever afraid to talk to legal or compliance. This was wonderful. I really enjoyed the conversation. We could clearly do many more hours on this subject, but we will let you go. Thank you, Ellie and Chelsea, so much for joining us. This was a fantastic conversation.
Thanks so much, Alex and Kareem.